Well, museums and private collectors around the world have been told to return stolen artifacts to the countries they came from. At a major United Nations conference in Mexico, delegates to UNESCO heard accounts of artistic treasures plundered from Africa and Latin America, often by colonial powers which ran them. Cultural ministers and representatives from 150 countries committed to expanding efforts to return historical artifacts to their countries of origin following a UNESCO conference in Mexico City. The declaration from the United Nations Cultural Arm called for open, inclusive international dialogue on illegally acquired artifacts and concrete measures to battle the illicit trade in antiquities. To take this discussion further, then we are joined via Zoom by novelist and poet Professor Zakes Mda. Prof Mda, a warm welcome to you. Thanks for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
Thank you, Flo.
You're most welcome. Let's first start with what your point of view is on the latest developments from this UNESCO conference, calling on museums and private collectors to return stolen artifacts to their country of origin. It sounds good and well, I must say, Prof, but practically, how do you feel about this, and will this ultimately actually happen?
Well, practically, I feel that in the past few years, we have seen, some headway. In other words, we are making some headway in our campaign to return these works of art from overseas. For instance, in my case, I can tell you that I started joining this campaign in 1977. And at that time, even in Africa here, no African government supported us. In my case, the campaign started in 1977 precisely because there was a very big festival of African arts in Nigeria that year. And the festival organizers chose the sculpture of Queen Idia, who was one of the queens of the old empire of Benin, as the symbol of that festival. It was called Festac. It was the logo of that of Festac, Queen Idia. But now they wanted to have the sculpture itself present in Nigeria, but they couldn't get it. It was in Britain. They tried to negotiate with Britain. At first, Britain agreed, provided the Nigerians paid insurance for it.
Yeah.
But soon they turned around and said, no, we don't think Queen Idia will be safe in Nigeria. So we are not going to lend you, mind you, lend them the sculpture that they had looted in 1897 in Benin.
I want to actually...
when they said...
Yeah, I want to actually ask you this, because this has been, a question, an example, and that has been put out there when it comes to justifying why some of these stolen artifacts should stay in the countries to which they were taken after they were stolen. You would hear an example of, well, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with this particular artifact once it is returned to your country? And I must say, I particularly hate that particular question, because it's almost like someone stealing my car and then, using it to make money with it, and then saying, well, I did better use with your car, so I'm not going to return it to you. So, whatever I decide to do with my car, it's my car at the end of the day, is it not? And that has been used as some sort of a justification. But I want to know, what do we say to that when we keep hearing these kinds of things that say, well, we've done better with these stolen artifacts than you could ever do with them. What are you going to do with them? And should we actually entertain the question? Should we answer the question?
Well, you see, sometimes we have no choice but to answer the question. It is a silly question, it's an arrogant question, but the fact of the matter is that these sculptures and these works of art are not with us at the moment, and they are with them. The example I'm giving, that Nigeria was only borrowing, merely borrowing, and they refused. But the main thing is that, you see, the reason they gave was that we don't think this sculpture will be safe in Nigeria or will be looked after well in Nigeria. The fact of the matter, when it was stolen, some of these sculptures are hundreds or even thousands of years old, and they were kept by the owners in their proper context, because these works of art are not just beauty for its own sake. They have a context. They operate in that particular context, in many cases, which is a very sacred context. So these icons and gods and so on were kept very safe by the owners, because the owners knew what they were there for, why they were created by their ancestors.
You know, some of these...
Sometimes the excuse...
So some of these colonial powers like to pretend that they've let go. Sorry to interject there. Some of these former colonial powers do like to pretend as though they've let go of the countries that they overtook. But, you know, looking at the fact that, you know, there's this almost refusal to let go of artifacts, and there's other ways in which these former colonialists show that they don't want to let go of their former colonies. Would this be the perfect way for them to express that they indeed have moved on? I mean, I was, you know, and I'm sure you did too, watch the funeral service of the late Queen Elizabeth, and, you know, there was a lot of talk about that particular diamond that's, you know, that sits on her crown, and people asking about the return of this particular diamond, and, you know, it just seemed to be a question that, you know, people just didn't want to answer, especially if you're talking to people in England.
And one other excuse that they always give now, besides that, how are you going to look after these things, is that, well, these are spoils of war. We conquered you and took these as spoils of war. In other words, unashamedly, they would say, this now is part of our patrimony because they are spoils of war. In other instances, for instance, that diamond was taken here and given as a gift to the royal family there by the colonists themselves, Cecil John Rhodes and so on. And anybody who wants it back now, would have to buy it back. But of course, that royal family will never put it back on auction. You see? It will take campaigns and campaigns. For instance, the fact that now some of these artifacts have been returned, even those of Benin, some of them have been, but only a small percentage. It is precisely because there is no silence about this. Since 1977, the campaign has been going on for their return. And some of them, of course, have been returned. I saw early this year, for instance, the golden crown of Ethiopia, of Aksum, has been returned back to Ethiopia as well. But there are still thousands of them that are in America because Britain shared them with America. There are others even in Japan. You see, Japan got them from the Europeans. And the Japanese will tell you, we bought these. So we cannot give them away. We bought them from the British.
Is it safe to say?
Like the issue right now.
Is it safe to say, Prof, that you know, we keep hearing these statements about how these former colonial powers, you know, are sorry, or well, I've actually never heard the word sorry, but that they acknowledge the atrocities of the past. But then, is it safe to say that then there isn't an acknowledgement then of this particular horrific past, and that they aren't in fact sorry for this colonial past? Because I would think that this would be the perfect gesture to kind of show, to raise that white flag and say, we erred, we did you wrong, and here's how we're making amends. Maybe a step forward. You can never make an amends for what happened, of course, in the past, but certainly a step in that direction.
Well, they cannot say they're sorry, Flo, because they are not sorry. You know that they always give what they think are very good reasons for colonialism. It is something that happened during those times. It was part of what was happening in that period in the world. And it was part of the wars that we were fighting. These are spoils of those wars. They now belong to us. So they're not sorry. They always give the same excuses that, for instance, or reasons, okay, maybe let me call them reasons, that, for instance, a person like Helen Zille here in South Africa has given. That, no, in fact, we colonized you and we assisted you. You still be living in the forest or something like that. If we had not done so, you should be grateful to us instead of asking us to be sorry and to return things that we conquered in war, which is all nonsense, of course.
Yeah. Prof, a pleasure talking to you. I wish you could continue this conversation. We appreciate your time here on SABC News, sir.